I'm Chris, you're watching FRAG-MENTAL, thank you for joining me. I'm back with another Perfume Parlour video. This time I'm diving in to Nasomatto. Stay tuned. If you've just found my channel and you're watching it for the first time and you've never heard of Perfume Parlour before, well, if it weren't for Perfume Parlour, this channel would not exist. Perfume Parlour are essentially a cologne house that offer clones at really affordable prices. As far as I can tell, they seem to be the best, the cheapest prices you can find cologne fragrances online, which is why they're so popular and why so many people find their way into the world of fragrance, and particularly into the world of niche fragrances that are very expensive. That's exactly what happened to me. I started discovering all these weird and wonderful smells through Perfume Parlour. I was buying more and more. That led me into collecting fragrances, and now I own a lot of fragrances, some of them based on originally owning the Perfume Parlour ones. Now, Nasomatto is one of my favourite niche fragrance houses. I just love how they manage to balance artistry with mass appeal. I think they just get it really right, and I just love how they all smell. They just really vibe with me. So I own 4 from Nasomatto. These are my favourite 4 Nasomatto fragrances. I also own the Perfume Parlour versions, so in this video I'll be comparing the Perfume Parlour with the Nasomatto. The first one I'm going to talk about is the immense and intoxicating Black Afghano. Notes in this one are cannabis, green notes, resins, woody notes, coffee, tobacco, incense and oud. So Nasomatto don't officially list notes. The notes that I just mentioned are from Fragrantica, but I kind of agree with what is listed. They seem to sync up with what I get from this fragrance. So what is Black Afghano? It is one of the first niche fragrances that I smelled. Well, the Perfume Parlour version was the one I smelled first. I couldn't quite interpret what I was smelling. It just seemed so different. I kind of felt like it was so potent and strong that I shouldn't like it, but I did. I was just drawn to it, and the more and more I wore it, the more I really understood the fragrance and the more I really enjoyed it. So if you're not used to smelling strong niche fragrances, this could be a little bit of a shock at first. But it is such a stunning fragrance in my opinion. So the Perfume Parlour version comes pretty close. There are a few small differences. The most notable one, I would say, is the note of cannabis. In the Perfume Parlour, it's actually more prominent than in this one. Cannabis is a really nice note in fragrances, so I'm fine with it being a little more prominent, not by much, but I think you do smell it more in the Perfume Parlour version. I think you get more of the incense and a little more sweetness to the original. The Perfume Parlour seems a little more woody as well, perhaps just a little more oud. So I would say that this one is a little dirtier, a little rougher around the edges, not quite as refined as the original. I think because of that, this one leans a little more masculine. This one is definitely not feminine leaning. I would say it is a unisex fragrance, but for people who do want something that edges away from unisex and more into that masculine territory, I think that you might find that one more in the Perfume Parlour version. You know, sometimes we're just in the mood for a dirtier, rougher around the edges fragrance. It just depends how we're feeling and how we might want to be perceived. So I think there's definitely a place for both of these. They are the same DNA. You're just going to get just something slightly different with the Perfume Parlour. In fact, I would say if Nasomatto were to make a more intense or extreme version of Black Afghano, it might be something like this one. What you also get from the Perfume Parlour is performance that matches the original. Actually, I'd go as far as to say this performs a little better, certainly in that initial projection, because it is just jumping off the skin a little bit more, because it's got those stronger, more intense notes. In the longevity, I'd say they're probably the same. Perfume Parlour's version is a really nice take on the DNA. In fact, I would go as far as to say it is one of the best in the whole of Perfume Parlour's catalogue. The next one is one of my favourite ever boozy fragrances. This has probably the best whiskey accord in any fragrance that I've smelled. It is, of course, Baronda. Notes are musk, whiskey accord, rose, ambroxan and woody notes. If you've not really tried boozy fragrances before and you hear people talking about them and you're thinking, why would I want to smell of booze? Why would I want to smell of stale whiskey, as if I've been drinking in the pub all day. It's not that, it's not like that. The best way I can describe boozy fragrances is that they smell as pleasurable as that whiskey might taste as you drink it. Might seem a little bit weird, so it's not actually the smell of whiskey on your breath. It doesn't smell like that, but it is that beautiful taste, that creamy, smooth whiskey as you drink it. This is the smell equivalent of that beautiful warming sensation that you get from drinking whiskey. So Baronda is like drinking one of the smoothest, creamiest, perfectly blended whiskies you've ever drunk in your life. It is just an exquisite fragrance. And I also get a bit of a malt accord, just ever so slightly like the malt in those hot malt drinks that I used to drink as a kid, and that's probably to do with the whiskey accord. It's there to help create this whiskey accord. So the Perfume Parlour version does a good job. It gets you pretty close. I would say that this is a little sweeter than the original, and also doesn't quite have the same amount of depth and performance. It's not far behind, but for me, the original is overall better in its scent and its performance. But the Perfume Parlour version definitely does give you that boozy Baronda DNA. So if you want to try out that style of fragrance, if you want to try maybe a boozy fragrance for the first time, the Perfume Parlour version would be a good and a cheap place to start. So the next one is probably the most divisive and challenging fragrance of these 4 Nasomatto fragrances that I'm talking about today. This is a real statement maker. If you're in the mood to go out there and be confident and really make a statement, you might want to be wearing Duro. Main accords in this one are woods, leather and spices. So let me try and explain to you in the best way I can how this smells, because it might be difficult to try and get a sense of how it smells just based on that very limited note or accord list there. So when I smell this, I get something slightly medicinal from it. I also get a very peaty whiskey and mix some pencil shavings in there as well. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of how interesting this fragrance smells and why it's quite a bold scent and why it makes a statement. So if you're in the mood for something assertive, then Duro really hits the spot. The Perfume Parlour version, again, gives you that idea of Duro. It is fairly close. I would say that this is sweeter and less challenging actually than the original. So if you think that this might be a little bit too much for you, the Perfume Parlour version is a good place to start. I think it's easier to wear. So you could say that the original would be the statement making formal occasion scent or evening fragrance, special occasion fragrance, whereas the Perfume Parlour version is the slightly lighter, easier to wear, more mass appealing version of that DNA, so you could wear it more as a day scent. If you want to try and get an idea if Duro is a fragrance that you might like, if you think that that DNA is something you're interested in or curious about, try the Perfume Parlour version first, because it's going to give you a little bit of an idea. If you do try this one, to try and imagine what this one smells like, take the smell, make it a little stronger, a little more potent, and you'll have a bit of an idea of how this one smells. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested, start with the Perfume Parlour and then maybe progress onto the original, just as I did, if you like it. We're finishing with my favourite, just by a little bit, of all these 4 Nasomatto fragrances. This is an absolute stunner. It's Pardon. Notes are magnolia, dark chocolate, tonka bean, cinnamon, oud and sandalwood. Pardon is my favourite Nasomatto because it just seems to strike that perfect balance between satisfying niche complexity and mass appeal. I've had quite a few compliments wearing this fragrance, which I was surprised at first, but people seem to like it. I think it's that tonka bean and that chocolate accord that just seems to be very enjoyable for those around you. Perfume Parlour goes some way to recreating that DNA. Definitely smells very similar. I would say it's a little rougher around the edges Again, seems to be a common thing, doesn't it, with clones, perhaps not quite as refined. The hours and hours of research and development and fine-tuning that goes into these exquisite original fragrances just can't be replicated by clone houses. Often it feels like they do just get it just right, but on many an occasion they get really close, and it's just those little nuances, just those little bits of fine-tuning that perhaps aren't quite there. That's how I would describe Perfume Parlour's version of Pardon. I love it. I think it's a fantastic fragrance, but it is a little rougher around the edges, and I get a little bit more of those pencil shavings in this one, so it's perhaps not quite as smooth as Pardon, which I think is very smooth. By the way, Pardon is another statement making fragrance, not quite as assertive, maybe not as challenging as Duro, but I still think it is an assertive statement making fragrance. The Perfume Parlour also dials down the florals a little bit, which personally I feel is what balances out the original so perfectly. Maybe you find the florals a little too feminine, or you want something a little more masculine. If that's the case, then definitely look at the Perfume Parlour version, because I'd say perhaps does lean a little more masculine, with it having that kind of slightly rougher feel to the composition. If you want to smell the absolute best version of the Pardon DNA, you have to try the original. If it's a bit out of your price range, you'll be paying £125 for 30ml of extrait concentration. For the equivalent Perfume Parlour 30ml, you're going to be paying £8.75, so there's a bit of a price difference there. If you want to get an idea of how amazing Pardon smells, try the Perfume Parlour one, because it will certainly give you that. By the way, if you do want to purchase any of these fragrances, you can use my affiliate link, which I will leave in the description. It's not going to cost you any more. I do get a small kickback from it, which is how we make a living off YouTube. It's how you know, the channels are supported and how we can continue to make the videos. So if you use that link, that really helps me out. Please do not feel obliged to use that link. You can find your own way to Perfume Parlour's website. That's absolutely fine. But if you did use it, it really helps me out a lot. So thank you in advance if you do that. And by the way, new signups will receive a 10% discount on the first order. Because I love Nasomatto so much, I wanted to share my experiences both on the original fragrances and comparing them to the Perfume Parlour versions. I owned all the Perfume Parlour ones first, so I got to know those fragrances and really decide whether I wanted to purchase the originals. I collect fragrances and I like having the original bottles on my shelf. Not everyone needs that, but you know, I wanted that, so it was good to be able to smell the Perfume Parlour ones to decide whether I wanted to then buy the originals. And a lot of people use Perfume Parlour in that way. It's a good way to get a fragrance DNA and give it multiple full wearings, as opposed to just working off a very small sample, which is difficult to get quite a few full wearings out of. Also with Perfume Parlour, especially with these 13ml sprayers, they're just great to travel with. Throw them in your bag, you don't have to worry whether they leak or whether they break. If they do break, if you drop it on the floor of the hotel bathroom, then you know it's only going to cost you a £5 to replace, or maybe that's the time to upgrade to the original fragrance. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on the Perfume Parlour versions of these fragrances. Fragrances work differently for everybody. We all get slightly different performance and different smells because we all have different body chemistry. So please, if you have experience, leave that in the comments down below, because people might be tuning in to hear my opinions, but also they'll find it useful to just hear everyone's opinions as well if they're thinking of making any kind of purchase. So please do leave a comment if you've got any useful information. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. Thank you very much for watching. It is always appreciated. Remember, keep tuning into FM, keep smelling good, and I'll see you in the next video.